On the morning of the 26th of April 1999, 37-year-old Jill Dando left her fiancé Alan Forthing's house to go to her own place. The two were set to marry on September the 25th of that year. Unfortunately, that wedding would never happen. When Jill arrived at her front door, she put a key in, and before she could turn it, a man grabbed her from behind, pushed her to the floor, and while he held her head still with one hand, he used the other to press a gun directly on her left temple, and then he fired a single shot. The gun was so tightly pressed against her head that it made little to no sound, and even though there were many people around that street, no one heard anything. Two of her neighbors saw a man in a waxed jacket hastily leaving Jill's front lawn, a mobile phone in his hand. Now these two neighbors saw the man, but they didn't know what had just transpired. It would take 14 minutes for someone to find Jill's lifeless body. When she reached the hospital, she was already dead. And with her death began Britain's biggest investigation since the hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper. This is Jill Wendy Dando's story. Jill was born on November the 9th, 1969 in Weston-super-Mare, Somerset, in England. Jill knew from a very early age on that she wanted to be on TV. She even called the now notorious Jimmy Savile in hopes of being on his show when she was a child. She studied journalism and worked for a local paper, the same one her father and her brother worked at. It wasn't long until she made a big jump to the BBC in 1985. And she rose in its ranks very quickly. She was described as a very nice person and the perfect girl next door. She worked for the Breakfast Time News, the 6 o'clock news, and a show called Holiday where she could travel around, just to name a few of the shows she worked on. At the time of her death, Jill was working for a show called Crimewatch. In fact, the last episode of Crimewatch she recorded aired 6 days before her death. As I said, that fateful morning, Jill was at her own house, and this was very rare. She spent most of her days at her fiancé's place, and was even looking to sell hers. And this told police two things. Either this murder was extremely random, or this was meticulously planned. Before Jill arrived home, quite a few people noticed something weird happening around her house. The postman and a handyman and quite a few others saw a man in a suit and a blue Range Rover hovering around Jill's home. But they didn't really think anything of it. And police never managed to identify the man or the car. Crimewatch, the show Jill worked on before her death, was the police's first lead. They thought there was a good possibility that it was either one of the criminals she exposed on the show, or maybe one of their family members that killed her to get revenge. Now there were a lot of clues that this was a professional job. The killer knew he had to press the gun tightly against Jill's temple so not to make a noise, and this also ensured that he wouldn't have any blood on him. Jill was shot 30 seconds after getting out of her car. There was no hesitation whatsoever. The killer didn't try to abduct her or even push her into her house. The key was already in the lock, so this would have been an easy thing to do. Also, nothing got taken from Jill. She still had her money and her jewelry. And let's not forget, it was broad daylight in a busy neighborhood. The police left no stone unturned. Crimewatch aired a 3-hour special, and of course BBC continuously asked for leads from the public. By the end of it, the police had more than 2,000 possible suspects. All of this finally led police to make an arrest. Barry George, a local man, got arrested. Barry had a long list of arrests under his belt. He pretended to be a police officer on multiple occasions and had even served time for attempted rape. And he had snuck into Kensington Palace where Prince Charles and Princess Diana lived at the time. On the 25th of May in 2000, he got arrested by the police for Jill's murder. Now, the only evidence they had was that there was a microscopic amount of gunshot residue in one of his coats. Nonetheless, that was apparently enough because he was found guilty of killing Jill. Barry appealed unsuccessfully quite a few times, until 8 years later a judge ruled that the gunshot residue would be excluded from any case against him, because there was no proof that it was in any way related to the gun that killed Jill. And so Barry won his last appeal and was set free. Even more than that, they had his IQ tested, and it was below 70. The crime was so well planned that most experts said there was no way someone like Barry could have done it. But if it wasn't Barry, then who had killed her? Well, shortly before her death, Jill had fronted an appeal on BBC for aid to help Kosovian and Albanian refugees who were fleeing the Kosovo War. 3 days before Jill died, the UK had bombed a radio and television service owned by the Serbian leader. So some people thought she was killed in retribution. In fact, a lot of journalists in the Balkans were killed the same way Jill was. In 2012, the police even named a Serbian warlord by the name of Arkan as a possible suspect. But he had died in 2000, so he could never be questioned. But once again, there was little to no factual proof for any connection to that. Now, Jill did have stalkers, and they found about 140 men that fit the profile. but none of them could be placed anywhere near Jill at the time of her death. At some point, it became very obvious that the case would probably never be solved. That is, until now. Documents were submitted to a French court this year. These documents would shock investigators on the Jill Dando case. They said that her death was a hit, but Jill was the wrong victim. These documents are part of an ongoing case against the former boss of the elite model agency Gerard Marie, the former husband of supermodel Linda Evangelista. This man stands accused of SA-ing at least 11 women. These papers suggest that Marie hired a Russian hitman to kill another BBC reporter, Lisa Brinkworth. Lisa was working undercover to expose the sex crimes committed in the fashion industry, and apparently she was attacked by Marie. This incident was witnessed by many people, but the BBC forced her not to press charges. Regardless, the show exposing the shady fashion world was still broadcasted, and Lisa had to live in a safe house for years afterwards. Lisa and Jill look very similar, and even lived in the same area of West London, and they actually had a direct connection. Jill's fiancé was Lisa's doctor. Now in these documents, a man by the name of Omar Hafouche, a former elite execute, claimed he heard Marie say to a member of the Russian mob to deal with the problem. And only a few days later, Jill was dead. Now all of this is still very fresh, and all the documents and information has been given to Scotland Yard, and they're currently looking into it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe and to like for more true crime, and I hope to see you again in my next video.